Question number 45 on the reading portion of College Board's Test 3. The passage most strongly suggests that beekeepers' attempts to fight mite infestations with commercially produced insecticides have what unintentional effect? So this is asking about a very particular point in the story. Realize this is a quote question, so there's quotes for 46. But this is asking suggest. So suggest means not directly stated, but they're leaning towards saying something that's unsaid. Beekeepers' attempts to fight mite infestation with commercially produced insecticides have what unintended consequence? Well, if we remember, don't we know that, and this is, again, the quote's highlighted here, but this is where they talk about the insecticides that the bee keepers introduce into the colonies. Line 31. In addition, immunocompromised or nutritionally deficient bees may be further weakened when commercially produced insecticides are introduced into their hives by beekeepers in an effort to fight mite infestation. So the unintended consequence is we're going to pump in more insecticide into the beehives, and what do we find out? That actually could hurt them. Because what do we find out? We find out that in high doses, pyrethrum could be potentially toxic, and that these scientists postulate that the proper dosage of insecticide may be better left to the bees, line 37. They're able to better regulate than humans are. So what's the unintended consequence of introducing commercially produced insecticides into the beehives? It further weakens the bees, even though we expect it to help them. So A, what's the unintended consequence? A, they increase certain mite populations. No, we never say that increasing insecticides increases mite populations, actually decreases the health of the bees. What about B? They kill some beneficial forms of bacteria. Maybe that's true. That's like the classic. This is a good pop science answer, because you might have read that on how washing your hands kills the germs that are vital for your health and things like that. And you might pick that because you might say, yeah, that's true. These insecticides kill the good and the bad. Do they ever say that? Don't answer this question based on what you know or what you read or what news you read. Answer the question based on what was said in the passage. Do they ever say that commercially produced insecticide kill beneficial forms of bacteria? They never say that, and they never say it once. That might be true in the real world, but the passage never says it. Can't be right. What about C? The passage most strongly suggests that the beekeepers' attempt to fight mite infestation with commercially produced insecticides have what unintentional effect? C. They destroy bees' primary food source. No, they never talk about the bees' primary food source being killed by insecticides. Their primary food sources like clover or flowers or things like that. What about D? What is the unintentional effect of introducing commercially produced insecticides? D. They further harm the health of some bees. I like it. Notice the conservative wording of it. They further harm the health of some bees because they think that immunocompromised or deficient bees, and some bees, the ones that are already unhealthy, may be further weakened by the introduction of commercial insecticide. I think the answer, number 45, what's the unintended consequence of pumping in commercial insecticide into the bees? It weakens the bees that are already sick. D. Let's take a look at the quotes to match up to be sure. Question number 46 on the reading portion of College Board's Test 3. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So we think the previous question's answer is going to be D, because the question's asking, the passage suggests that beekeepers who pump the hives with commercially produced insecticides have what unintended consequence? So we want to pump the insecticide in order to prevent against mite infestation. But what happens? Well, if we remember in line 31, immunocompromised or nutritionally deficient bees, right, when commercial produced insecticides are introduced, may be further weakened. So we find that these bees who are already weak and they're already compromised, when we pump in more artificial or commercially produced insecticide, what happens? They further are weakened, or the insecticide further harms the health of some bees, which is answer choice D. So let's find a quote that backs that up. And maybe not only this answer choice, let's take a look at what quote backs up the question being asked. So pretend like we don't know any of the answer choices for 45. We have to answer a very particular question, a very precise question. And it's saying that what is an unintentional effect of commercially produced insecticide on the beehive? What is one unintended consequence of pumping commercially produced insecticide in the beehive? 1 to 2. Does this talk about that unintended effect? Honeybees are host to the pathogenic large ectoparasite mite varroa. Okay, what does that have to do with commercially produced insecticide? Absolutely nothing. I like on how when we answer this way, we're just answering the question, we're not worrying about what answer it matches up with. It makes it a lot easier. Let's answer again, commercially produced insecticides have what unintentional effect? 6 to 7. Little is known about the natural defense that keep the mite infections under control. What does that have to do with commercially produced insecticide? Nothing. 31 and 35. In addition, immunocompromised or nutritionally deficient bees may be further weakened when commercially produced insecticides are introduced. So when we introduce commercially produced insecticides, the bees that are already immunocompromised or nutritionally deficient may be further weakened, which matches up with the answer of what we think to answer 45. I really like C. Not only does it match up nicely with what we think the answer is, but it's also answering the question in 45 directly. What happens when we introduce commercially produced insecticide into the beehive? What about 47 to 50? Mites could then be introduced to each hive with note made as to the choice of the bees and the effects of mite parasites on the experimental colony versus control colony. That has nothing to do with commercially produced insecticides being introduced. This is part of the experiment, so you might think this has to do with introduction and bringing in variables and so on. But this is only talking about, we have one group that eats pyrethrum-producing plants, which is a natural insecticide. It's not commercially produced. And then we have another group that just has the clover. That we have nothing to do in this experiment with whether or not we pump in additional commercially produced insecticide after we introduce the mites. So D is kind of misleading, but it seems reasonable. I think D is the least bad answer, or is the best good bad answer of this question. The answer number 46 is going to be C, because C is directly talking about the effect of commercially produced insecticide on these beehives. And that nicely matches up with the answer to 45, that if we introduce this insecticide into the hive, it causes further damage to those bees that are already weakened and immunocompromised. The answer to 45 is going to be D, answer to 46, C.